A critical period is a time when certain things must occur for normal development. We've seen with some studies um, that, like language, for example, if you don't learn it by a certain time, you may never have that ability. You'll always kind of struggle with learning things. Um, say a sensitive period would be a time when a particular development occurs most easily. You can also actually use language for this one. So I've learned a language, so I speak, we'll say English. I speak English, but there is a sensitive period for me learning a different language. I'm much more likely to take it in and learn it when I'm much younger as a child than now if I try to pick it up as an adult. As an adult now, I'm always going to have an accent if I speak a different language. But if I would have learned it as a kid, I maybe could have been fluent in multiple languages without much of an accent. So this is also important to think of. Development is multi-contextual. So we're born into a certain historical context, um, which really can be said by the laws are different now than when my grandparents were growing up. The same thing. We grew up in just a different time period. My grandparents were born at the end of World War II, and I was born. There wasn't really a lot of war going on when I was born. So they certainly grew up in a time period that looks differently than when I was born. So we're certainly in different cohorts. And we talk about that a lot. You have like your baby boomers and the millennials and whomever. We're certainly defined by kind of that shared age. We've kind of had similar experiences. People of my age are much more likely to talk about like 9/11, whereas you might be much younger, so you have a different experience. Maybe the Boston Marathon bombing is more important to your cohort, or whatever age you may be. So we certainly have shared experiences within the ages that we were born into. Almost every developmental class that you'll ever take or learn from talks about Yuri Bronfenbrenner. He really has this ecological model and this ecological approach that says that we as persons are really affected directly by the people around us, but also indirectly by structures in place, by laws in place. Like, he really like breaks it down. There's a nice image of this on the next slide. So here you go. So you can look at, so the person, me as a person, you as a person, are going to be in this very inner circle, the yellow circle. So that's our developing person, and some facets of that. Then almost immediately and directly influencing us is going to be things in our microsystem. So things that are immediately affecting us on a daily basis. So our family, the peer group that we belong to, your very closest friends, and the communities in which you are daily interacting. So then you have your mesosystem, which is just a little bit further out and kind of this interaction of systems. So this could include, so maybe not the people you directly associate with, let's say at school, but they're around, you know them, you feel their presence, they are affecting you in some way. So you may not directly have interaction with them, but you have outside, they are indirectly affecting you. Same with your church. Maybe you don't speak to everyone, but you're kind of more aware of them. You kind of have these interactions with people. And then you move on to the exosystem, which again is kind of these bigger institutions. So maybe this is it's still kind of your church or your school, but more your religious values versus the people in the church specifically affecting how you interact with the world. So if you have a certain belief, it's going to trickle down, and through your church it's going to trickle down and into how you interact with other people and so on. And then you have the macro systems, which is going to be this larger social setting. So this is really where the laws come into play, what policies are in place through the government, both federal and state. You could even break it down to what policies are in place at your school. So policies, procedures, what cultural values do you hold, or does the culture that you live in hold? Maybe they're in contrast with one another. So kind of how that all trickles down and affects you. It may not be directly affecting you like in the moment. You may not recognize it as affecting you, but it trickles down and does affect you. And then the chrono system literally means the time system. So how that affects the other system. So what point in time is this happening? What age are you when this is happening? What other cultural factors are happening at this time? There's just so many things that can kind of really play into that. We're all affected by these different time systems historically. Most of the terms we use to describe people are based on social construction. Um, so you can even say things as simple as like in adolescence, a child, a senior citizen. We've crafted these terms based on kind of this shared, we think maybe cohort situation where you have these shared ideas. You're kind of in this shared age range, but we really just made them up. They don't actually mean anything. We'll talk about probably later when we get to adolescence. Adolescence wasn't even, it was really a term created kind of with industrialization in like the probably late 1800s. But before then, there was no such thing as an adolescent. Most kids didn't go to high school. Most kids went straight to work. There wasn't this kind of like delayed childhood. And even more recent, emerging adulthood is a new term that really came about 2004. So it's brand new almost. So a lot of things we'll kind of talk about, some social constructions also as we go along through the chapters. It's interesting to think about this kind of deficit idea that people are, different. Being different is somehow lesser than, because the reality is we're all different. Not one of us is the same. We're not having the same thoughts. We're not having the same actions, reactions, all the things. And if we did, what a boring world that would be. We wouldn't have anything to talk about because we'd all be thinking the same thing and doing the same things. We wouldn't have anything. We would just be little robots going through life. So I think it's much more interesting that, in fact, we are different from one another. Lev Vygotsky was really focused on learning in his research. He, I think this is a picture with him and his daughter. Basically, he said, we have this way of learning. Mentors teach us something based on their skills, and then we are able to learn to do things on our own, and then eventually teach someone based on how we have learned and what we know. Ethnic groups share certain attributes, almost always including ancestral heritage and usually national origin, religion, and language. Race is a group of people regarded as distinct from other groups on the basis of their appearance. Social scientists think race is a misleading concept, as biological differences are not signified by outward appearance. In the Lifespan book, they have ethnicity is referred to more often than race, but race, I believe, is used when the original data that they're reporting is reported that way. I think it's very important to name and recognize racism and so many other things. I think this is just the tip of the conversation. Page 18 in your book is where the opposing perspectives is that talks about using the word race. I really encourage you to read it and think critically about the social construct and what it does.